All right. In this video, I want to talk about the existence of God and how it's self-evident that God actually exists. A lot of the stuff I'm going to get into here should not have to be explained, but here we are explaining it. So anyway, the first thing I want to actually get into is existence itself. It's kind of strange, right? That things actually exist. Why doesn't nothing exist? Why does something exist? It's kind of strange. And then when you realize that energy cannot be created or destroyed, yet here we are, and there's energy. So if it can't be created, why is there energy? Why does it exist? How does it exist if it can't be created? And you think about these things, and it's just your mind boggles, and it's like, okay, I need to slow down, think about something else, or I'm going to have an aneurysm here because it's very interesting, very interesting. And this whole energy cannot be created or destroyed really gets you thinking, because energy can only be changed. And that should get you thinking about eternity. You see, our physical bodies, we know, die. We're going to shed this mortal coil, but we go on. Energy cannot be destroyed. And that's what we are, right? We can only be transferred to a different state. And something you need to focus on is eternity to come, and not so much on this physical world, because that's eternity. This here is temporary. It's not a long time. We're like dust in the wind, a vapor. Here today, gone tomorrow, all right? So eternity is what you should be focused on, because there's only a couple places you can go. So it's something to think about there. But anyway, after just thinking about this, it's kind of hard to move on here, right? Existence exists, energy exists, but why doesn't nothing exist? And if energy can't be created, why does it exist? It's like, what can you do with that? Well, we can think about other things and help us understand that. One is consciousness. Consciousness is another thing that's very interesting and hard to grasp, the fact that you're conscious, right? And it's strange to think that you think some rocks clacked together and fell down a hill into a puddle and were struck by lightning, and all of a sudden there's consciousness. That's imagination, speculation. It's not reality. Science is what we can actually observe, something we can actually test, and things we can predict. And through science, we can see that consciousness only comes from something actually conscious, and that something that's not conscious never produces something that actually is conscious. And we can predict that that's all we're ever going to find. That is, consciousness only comes from something conscious, and that consciousness never comes from something that is not conscious, right? That's science. Now, when we go to the next step, thinking about consciousness, we come to an infinite regress, something that's an impossibility. And that's why I'm just using this timeline. What is presented here doesn't matter. I'm just using it because it's a timeline here, as you can see, from 2010 to 2017. And I just wanted to have something for you to be able to visualize what I'm saying here. Now, let's say you come into existence at 2015, right? You need 2015 to exist for you to come forth, right? Well, in order for 2015 to exist, it needs 2014. 14 needs 2013 to come first, and 2013 needs 2012 to come first, and so on and so forth, right? They need the preceding year to happen first, right? Makes sense. But the problem comes here is that if you don't have a beginning, and that this keeps going backwards forever, you will never get to 2015 where you come into existence. Because all those other things have to happen first, right? Because when we get here to 2010, well, it needs 2009. So it can't exist yet. But 2009 can't exist because it needs 2008. And if that keeps going on and on and on and on forever, then you could never get to 2010, and therefore you could never get to 2015. So there actually has to be a starting point. So if you just use this with consciousness, and with what I'll talk about next is life itself, is there's a beginning that is actually conscious. There's a starting point of consciousness that brings forth something conscious, which then can bring forth something conscious and pass it down. But there ultimately has to be a starting point of that consciousness. And it has to be conscious, or else it cannot pass it on. So here we're starting to see God. So let's continue on with this. We have life. Just checking my notes right here. This is the same thing that has to do with consciousness. Using science, which is what we can actually observe and we can test and predict with, we can see that life only comes from something living, right? Whether something has parents or something is able to duplicate itself, like some kind of bacteria or what have you, is able to replicate itself. It comes from something living, right? And we can predict that that's all we're ever going to find, is that life produces life, and that something not living doesn't produce something that is living. And I know some of you may be saying abogenesis. I don't know why people are still saying that. Look into abogenesis. What they did was they created an environment that they assumed the early Earth was in, right? They left out oxygen, and they mixed these things up, and they put in electricity to actually be a simulation of lightning. And they were able to create some RNA, right? Now, you may be thinking, oh, there's life. RNA is not life. They'll say it's the building blocks of life. Yeah. They created left-handed RNA. That's not the building blocks of life. You need right-handed RNA to build life. The left-handed, not able to be used. Not only that, you don't know if you created any information that's actually legible, right? You didn't create the right RNA, you created left-handed, right? And you don't even know if it created something that makes any sense. Like, let's say it had to be in English, and you did this, right? And in order to be understandable in English, first it has to go from left to right. But you created it going right to left. So you did it backwards. And not only that, you don't even know if it actually makes sense in English. Like, you could just throw letters together and it able to stuck together with the experiment you did, but you don't know if it makes any sense, right? Not only that, is that the RNA quickly fell apart. The other issue is that you actually need something to be able to read the RNA, to understand it, and to build from it. So you didn't create life, you created some blocks that you were hoping could be used to build life, right? And it's basically like saying, I chopped down a tree and a branch fell off, there's a piece of wood, a house can build itself. You're like, that's stupid. Exactly, it is stupid, right? And they had to quickly remove the RNA that they did make from the environment, or else it would be destroyed. And if they had oxygen in the environment, it would have definitely been destroyed. And even without the oxygen, these supposed building blocks fell apart. The next issue with that abogenesis thing is that why do the experiment there? We have an atmosphere that's able to sustain life. Why don't we see new life forming from non-life right now? Why not have experiments with the atmosphere we got now and watch it and have life come forth? Because if life was able to come forth in the harshest environment possible for life, then it should be happening now much easier. Much easier. But it doesn't. So you can see again how this is really stupid. It's kind of like saying, oh, the best environment to build a house is in nice weather. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to this volcano and the forest is on fire, and we're going to chop down the tree and see if a house just comes about when we knock down the tree. And we're going to see what happens. It's like, well, if you think that's possible, why not do it in the forest on a nice day where it's more conducive to that possibly happening? Even though it's still ridiculous, it's more likely than while it's on fire in a harsh environment, right? But it just shows the superiority of their intelligence and their intellect is just way beyond ours, because you can just see the genius that's coming from their experiments. But anyway, connected to life, we see that DNA. I don't think I put a picture up here for DNA, so let's do that here. Let's just click DNA, or maybe I did. Ah, yes, I did. Okay. So this is just a quick zoomed in version of DNA. This would be obviously in the twisted helix little thing, but we see that it has like C to G and T to A, you know. It's what you see in the, see if I can get all of this in there. What we see in the connections with DNA, right? Now, these are considered base pairs, right? This is a pair, AT, GC, right? And in your DNA, you have billions of these pairs of DNA, if not more, right? Now, to simplify things, I'm just going to say the starting point we're going to say is 1,000 base pairs, just so our mind can grasp it a little easier. Because it's like $1,000, right? Now, when we breed something like dogs, horses, the genetic information we have in the DNA is either going to have things turned off, things turned on, things scrambled up a little bit, or completely removed. And when we breed these dogs, we can see the loss of information as we go from the wolf to all these different breeds, all the way down to, let's say, a Chihuahua. Now, we can genetically change things like that through breeding, but using actual science, things we can observe, things we can actually predict with, is that when we actually reproduce, genetic information is always going to remain at the same level or less, because we lose information as we breed these dogs. We cannot reverse the process and add the information back. Once it's gone, it's gone. Right? You cannot reverse this process through breeding. Right? So, an example is they have some of these horse breeds that have something like 38 chromosomes. They have a horse breed that has, I think, something like 34, 36 chromosomes, and they mix the horses through breeding, and you'll have a horse that has, the child horse will end up having, let's say the parent has 38 and the other one has 36. Well, they'll have a child with 37 chromosomes. And the evolutionists will look at half of the picture and go, hey, it's increase of information. It went from 36 to 37. And it's like, well, actually, the parent that had the most had 38 chromosomes, and that's a loss of information. Like, the parent is always going to have more. I think it was Aaron Ra, the famous YouTube atheist, was actually had a debate with Hovind a while ago, and he was actually talking about how the offspring cannot rise above their ancestry. His words were a little bit differently. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he's basically talking, what I'm talking about here is that the offspring, the children, are not going to be genetically more abundant than their ancestors. It can't happen. And he didn't realize that right there he's proving that evolution is BS, because we actually see the second law of thermodynamics playing out where things fall into chaos and not order. Things are actually falling apart, not coming together into order, right? So we see a loss of information, never a gaining of information. You may be saying, well, there is cases of gaining of information. And I'll talk about a couple of them. One is an extra chromosome in humans. Guess what comes of that? Down syndrome. Oh, there's duplications in the DNA where they duplicate proteins and whatnot. What ends up happening? Well, there's different kinds of crippling diseases that leave people in wheelchairs because of a simple duplication of certain genes. All it has to take is one gene being duplicated and it screws up the human body. And they're in a wheelchair for the rest of their life. So when we see things actually being added, yes, it's possible. But it's always harmful. We don't have anything positive coming from that at all. And the way you could look at it is that the DNA is an information book. You look at this and it's CG, TA, GC, right? It's a language here. We don't understand it by looking at it, but it's a language. So you can just pretend it's English and it's saying attach the shoulder to the arm or whatever, right? To the certain area. That's what it's telling the cells in the body to do, right? To start building this in this area. Well, if you add information to that, that's going to screw things up. Like it said, all of a sudden there's some information that makes it sound like, oh, we should be attaching this to the hip or to the back on one of the vertebrae. It gets confused and it starts making this deformation, right? So you turn the information into a lie. There's confusing BS, right? But if you remove information from there, the information that's there is still usable. It's still true. It just doesn't have all the information. All right? So it still can get a gist of what's being said, and it does its best to build. And that's why you end up getting a chihuahua instead of a wolf, because it's able to use the genetic information that it has to still create something, but it doesn't have all the information to build what it's supposed to create, which is a wolf. Right? But if you add the information in, then you get this twisted thing that's crippled, not able to reproduce, not able to function. That's science. And we can predict this, that through reproduction, we're only going to see a mixing, scrambling of the information. So the base pairs are going to stay the same as the parents. Which if the parents have 1,000 base pairs in their DNA, they have 10 chromosomes. The children are going to have 1,000 base pairs, 10 chromosomes or less to function. If any kind of weird thing happens where there's an addition to the base pairs or to the chromosomes, it's going to be defective. We can actually predict that. That's science. And that's actually what we see using science through experimentation. We don't see the opposite. And I'm going to bring up one case that people may bring up with yeast, where they had yeast and they were messing with its DNA, and they were able to splice DNA from some different kind of germ or bacteria and splice it into the yeast, and the yeast was given some other function. I don't know if it was able to digest an additional material. I can't remember what it was, but it worked. They added information into the yeast and it functioned. But when they continue the experimentation, that after a while, that yeast germ ended up correcting the information that was added. It removed that DNA that was added to it, the RNA, and even when it reproduced with that DNA structure in it, it did not pass on that new information. So even adding the information in, it took intelligence to do so, to make it work. It didn't happen randomly. It took an outside force to intelligently do it. And even when that was done, it self-corrected itself and did not pass on the new addition, adding more evidence against evolution and what they teach. Now, we do see an evolution in the sense where things adapt and they do what they call speciation, where they're not able to reproduce anymore as they divert so differently. Because let's say you take, since we're talking about wolves a bit, let's just take wolves. We have a family of wolves. They grow big. We split them in half. We put one in a certain area and another in a certain area. There's going to be changes to their DNA over time where it's different with both families. Because of their environment, their changes are going to be different in their DNA than the group over here and the changes they have to deal with. So after a while, because of these changes where they're going in a different direction, when you bring these two groups of wolves together after I don't know how long, they might not be able to reproduce, but they'll both still be wolves, right? They're both from the same kind. They're just not able to mix together anymore. These kind of things happen, but it's a degradation. The law of thermodynamics playing in where things are falling apart, not coming together and becoming more complicated and going into order. They're actually doing the opposite, falling apart and into disorder. With that being said, another point to this would be irreducible complexity. I don't think I have something up here. Maybe I do. Let's talk about entropy right here. You know, things keep falling apart. I don't know about this quote, but it says, entropy will continue to increase until enough dark energy is created to rip the universe as we know it into shreds. And that's just how things work. Things fall apart, right? Yet we teach children that the opposite of this happens, that things are improving. One, that's not scientifically true. Things started at a point that it was nice and things are just going downhill. It's not peaks and valleys going up in any way whatsoever, because they make it sound like you started from simple life, right? This little single-celled organism, and it had very little information, but then somehow it gained more and more information until it created plants and fish and so on and so forth, until it got to us, right? Yet that's not scientific. That's imagination, that's speculation. Because if you have, let's say, two organisms with 1,000 base pairs in the DNA, and humans have billions, how can you get from 1,000 to 1,000,000,000 without adding and only subtracting? You can't multiply. You could potentially divide. You can definitely subtract. But you can't add, you can't multiply. How can you go from 1,000 to 1,000,000,000? That's right, you can't. And that's what the science shows us. So when we look at these things such as consciousness in life, and energy can't be created and destroyed, and things are falling into disorder through entropy, we can trace this all back because there can't be an infinite regress. Because, you know what the atheists would say, well, who created God? And then who created that God? And then who created that God? Well, that's an impossibility. Because if they kept going and going and going, we wouldn't get to this point. But it just shows their childish thinking, and they basically deny things and accept things based on what they want to be true. And that's that. So if they believe it, Okay, it's true because it fits my beliefs. Oh, it's not. I don't believe this. Well, then it's not true. I don't care. Like this video. This is evidence for the existence of God. But they're going to reject it. It's just because they don't believe God exists. So he can't exist because they don't believe it. So this is an evidence. But we can see here that there can't be an infinite regress. So with consciousness only coming from something conscious, and life only coming from something living, that there's a starting point. And that starting point is alive and is conscious. Not only that, but it's the source of this energy that can't be created or destroyed. It probably is that energy that can't be created nor destroyed. We see the source. The source is this energy. And the source is alive. The source is conscious. Or else it couldn't produce life and conscious life. There's God. Right? This is self-evident stuff here. But anyway, now I know some of the things that might be being said right now. Well, there's 1,052,000 gods. How are we supposed to know it's your God that's the real God? That's a fair point. It's a fair point. Well, first, we had to set the foundation to show you that God actually exists. And if you can't accept that, well, there's something wrong with your psyche here. You know, you're wanting something to be true to the point where you're just going to deny everything against it. There's a mental disorder, right? You're mentally ill, right? You're denying reality. You're living a delusion. You're delusional. You're a crackpot. You're crazy. So to move on from here would be pointless until this foundation is set, till your mental illness is actually healed here, and you're able to accept the reality that God exists. And then we can start to show who this God is, right? So, with that foundation being set for the, I guess, those of you who've already believed God, because I doubt anybody is going to change their mind because of the evidence. That's just not how things work. People don't base their beliefs on the evidence. They base their beliefs on what they want to be true, what they feel to be true. But anyway, let's actually move on from here. Oh, irreducible concept, irreducible complexity. I forgot to talk about that. I guess I'll touch this before I talk about who God is. But anyway, irreducible complexity. This is like a mousetrap. Have you ever heard anybody talk about the mousetrap? The little rectangle piece of wood and has the little pieces of metal on it, made in such a way that when the mouse comes and eats the cheese, it triggers the spring and slams that piece of metal on it and breaks its spine or neck or what have you. Or at least injures it really bad and makes it wish it was dead. That little trap there, they've tried to make it better by making it simpler. But they realized that it can't get any simpler than it is. It's irreducibly that. So what that means is that that mousetrap, the way you see it, had to actually come about in that form for it to work. It couldn't come about where it's just the piece of wood, just the metal, just certain pieces, or else it would never end up doing its function of catching a mouse. So what that means is when you have an organism that functions in a certain way and you reduce its complexity to the minimal point, it shows that it had to have a certain amount of complexity to it that had to start with to even function. You know what I'm saying here? So that means that You couldn't have a life form that was so simple that it couldn't reproduce, it couldn't eat and digest the food, it couldn't do what it needed to do. There's a certain amount of complexity that it has to start off with, like the ability to move, to take in energy, the food, to be able to break it down and to use it, to excrete the waste, to reproduce itself. Like these things need to happen, like sex, gender. They needed to have a certain amount of complexity for the male to have certain functions to be able to pass its seed on, and the woman had to have certain functions to be able to receive the seed, right? So there has to start with that complexity of each having that function. Not only that, but the male and female had to exist at the same time, and they had to meet each other in order for that ability of sexual reproduction to pass on, right? So you see the irreducible complexity there. So the male and the female had to exist at the same time with the right parts to connect to be able to share the right information. Because what if the woman actually didn't have eggs, she had sperm, and so did the male. So when they came together, there was no reproduction. Or the woman had eggs, but also the male produced eggs that it would shoot out instead of sperm. Again, we don't have reproduction, right? So you have something not working. Doesn't make sense, right? So these things have to be coming in at the same time at a certain amount of function, and they have to come together in a way for things to move on, showing that there's design, there is intention, that there's some kind of outside force, because these things randomly happening where, oh, all the stuff happened perfectly to come together randomly to produce a male. Whoa, what are the chances of that? 1 in quadrillion billion, number I can't even say because it's such so large that the word is never used in regular common language. Whoa. And then at the same time, the complete opposite version of the female happened to exist in the same species. What are the chances of that? And then they ended up meeting each other? Holy cow. That's not science. That's ridiculous. Right? So irreducible complexities, such as this super complex motor on this little organism here to be able to move, I can't get any simpler than this, but it's actually fairly complicated. So you couldn't have just certain little pieces of this develop stage by stage over reproduction, because it wouldn't work. It would be useless, and it would at times hinder it from doing whatever it needs to do. It needs to actually be able to come together at the same time to be able to work, right? Kind of like the mouth. What's the point of being able to chew up the food if you don't have a stomach? What's the point of having this mouth and the stomach if you don't have the way to actually get rid of what you're eating? And it all just builds up. You need the entire tract at the same time working together, doing their function for it to work, right? Like, what's the point of the stomach? You don't have a mouth, right? All the functions has to come together. Again, these things should not have to be talked about and mentioned. I mean, you maybe talk about it to a child, but as adults, you should be able to cognitively think about these things. But I think the problem is a lot of people have mental disorders, to be honest. A lot of people are delusional. I think it has something to do with NPD. It's narcissistic personality disorders, like spreading like wildfire. Where people lack humility, and they build their own delusional worlds, and anybody who doesn't want to be part of that world, they despise to the point that they just want to get rid of them. And you can see this weird mentality through a lot of different people with like atheists. Like there's can be an atheist hanging out with me and other Christians, and we're not going to treat them like shit. But then there's times where I would go hang out with old friends that are atheists, and I'm mocked all the time. It's kind of strange. That's just how it starts. It escalates the longer you stay. Things just get more and more irritating to them. You know, that your spirits rub together, I guess. And you see this with certain groups. I just saw this one, a little bit off subject, but just to make the point. There was this lady interviewing two sides of this street where it looked like they were having these protests. One side was leftists, one side was rightists, right? I am not Democrat or Republican, okay? I'm not on either side. I see points that both make that are correct, that I agree with, and both sides make some points that I don't agree with, right? But anyway, I don't put my faith in man, I put it in God, what I'm saying here. But anyway, this lady was interviewing, and she was trying to get one person from either side to go visit the other side to basically kind of make some kind of peace, to show like, hey, the other side isn't the one doing violence. So she actually was talking to a couple people on the left, and they were thinking that, oh, this is a trap. You want us to go over there for a certain reason. And she ended up talking to this black fella. And he was like talking the other side's all racist stuff. And she's like, okay, would you come over there with me and we can expose their racism by how they treat you? And he was like, all right. So they went over there and they started talking to the people on the right. And at first they didn't even realize he was on the left. They didn't even seem to care. And she was saying, oh, he's from the other side. Do you think he's going to be ill-treated over there? And I'm like, no. I actually embraced him, going like, come on, let's go. And there was other black people on the right side saying, no, why would you be mistreated? Right? And so he was actually welcomed for the most part. And she did the opposite and goes, okay, let's go over there and see how they treat the opposition. And these people were taking a microphone and started yelling and not letting them talk. Like anytime they wanted to talk or say something, they were just yelling in the microphone so that they couldn't speak. Other people would blow smoke in their face when they would go by. Right? And this is what I'm talking about, a mental disorder, where they create this delusional world where the other side is like demonic and they're all this evil way, but in reality it's themselves. They are the way that they say on the other side is. And when you're against their delusion, their defense mechanism is to get rid of you because you're trying to destroy the world that they have created to protect themselves, to protect their psyche and whatnot. And there's not much to do about it except for pray for them. Because reasoning with these people, like with this video, I guarantee the comments I get from atheists are going to be completely unreasonable. I doubt even they got this far into the video. And it's just a bunch of mocking and scoffing. I bet most of what they're going to say is something simple like this. You didn't present any evidence. You don't have any evidence to God. There is no evidence for God. We have this abundance evidence for evolution. And they're not going to present any evidence. They're just going to say, we have this abundance of information. There's so much overwhelming evidence. It's insane. Everybody can see it. You're blind. You're an idiot. And that's basically the general consensus of the comments will be that. It's, yeah, it's unreasonable. It's delusional. And there's nothing you could do about it. You know, the people aren't going to listen to this. They're just going to respond without hearing you out. They've already labeled you judged you, demonized you, put you aside, and you need to fit into their beliefs or go to hell, right? Basically their mindset. And yeah, so with that being said, kind of rambling on, ranting a little bit there, I'll get on with the video here. Should be my next point here. And that is, who is God? Well, God shows who he is. In the Bible, he's like, test me. I'm going to tell you the end from the beginning. I'm going to tell you the future so that when it happens, you know I am he. I am that I am. So he understands that you're going to doubt, right? And this is a really good one right here. I'm just going to use this one as an example. In Daniel chapter 2, which I hope you check out, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar, or however it said, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the king of Babylon. He has a dream, but he can't remember it, but it's troubling him to the point where he wants to remember because it really hit him. And eventually Daniel was able to not only tell him what his dream was, but the interpretation thereof. And he says, you had a dream of this statue. It had a head of gold, had a chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet, part of iron and part of clay. Now, the details of this prophecy are broken down more when you continue on in Daniel, like in Daniel chapter 7, and then later on about the ram and the he-goat. And it gets into such detail about the families and stuff going on when the Grecian Empire starts to break apart, that people were saying what atheists would say now is that, oh, they wrote this after the fact. Well, if that's true, let's just focus on the Roman part then. Because Babylon was taken over by the Medes and Persians. And then Greece took over the Medes and Persians. And then as the belly and thighs is described in Revelation chapter 7 as a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, we see that the Grecian Empire, as it just kind of swiftly went over and took over everything really fast. And then Alexander the Great died at a young age, and his kingdom was broken up under 4 generals, so the 4 heads. And then we had the legs of iron, Rome, and then Rome split into the east and the west. Right? So this was definitely written before this happened. Right? And then we have this period of things kind of change. And you have the iron mixed with the clay. This was written there before this happened, where not only did the Jews say, we have no king but Caesar, and they mixed with the Roman Empire, but also the Christians later on mixed with the Roman Empire, and the 3 of them, pagan Rome, apostate Judaism, and apostate Christianity, came together and they formed Catholicism. Because clay in the scriptures represents God's people, as he made man out of the dust of the earth, out of the clay. And he tells Israel that I'm the potter and you're the clay. I can do with you as I will. And that's what we see here, is that it's miry clay, dirty clay. It even talks about it baked clay, where it's hardened, where you can't use it to change it into something else, right? You can't clean it up. And that's what we're seeing today. And then we're coming to the 10 toes, where this is going to reform, where the 10 toes represents 10 kings. We see this actually going to happen. Not to mention all the prophecies pointing to Jesus and his actual advent on the earth. But I figured I'd bring this one up because it's talking about secular history here and about how things are going to be right now. Because after these legs of iron, there hasn't been another kingdom rise up to overtake Rome and to do what Rome did. You have pieces of Rome actually spread in this sense that Catholicism here, through Roman law, has done things through England and America, which is just a continuation of this pagan Roman Empire here. And that's something we actually see today. You look at the Vatican, London City, and Washington, D.C., they're all cities owned and run by the Vatican through Roman law. So you can see this prophecy actually being fulfilled and almost reaching its endpoint. And this stone right here you see on the side is because in the vision, as it says here, crushing rock, kingdom of God, is that there's a stone cut without hands, and it comes flying down in this dream. It hits the statue at the feet, because that's when Jesus is going to return. And he destroys the kingdoms of this world, and he establishes his own kingdom as this rock turns into a mountain and changes the landscape, right? And that's why you have these shows and movies about a meteor or an asteroid of some kind coming to the earth and it's going to destroy the earth. It's because they know that Jesus is coming, and they're trying to unite the world, as we're told in Revelation, that this beast is coming together with the world to deceive the world, to fight against the return of Jesus. And that's what these movies represent, is getting the world to team up to destroy the asteroid before it gets to the earth. And yeah, just interesting things showing prophecy. This is just a taste of what is in the Bible to prove God is who he is. But on top of that, we have things that the Bible tells us that is true, such as God created everything. We're like, why do things exist? Energy can't be created or destroyed. Well, God is that energy. It's just him. We are in him. It says things that it tells us that the Bible tells us that we are in him and that he sustains everything and he holds everything together. And all things were made for him and by him. And that's what is going on here. And we were made out of the earth, and all the different creatures were made separate. And each animal, each creature reproduces after itself. And that's exactly what we would see in science, or even the evolutionists say that we all have this common ancestor, right? Yet they make the common ancestor seem like some kind of simple life that ended up branching and become more complicated. But it's actually the opposite. That original life, that conscious life, is God, and he brought forth all the different living creatures. And they became less and less complicated, and they're becoming less and less complicated as time goes on, and they're falling apart. That's what we actually see using science with what we can actually observe, test, and predict, which is what science actually is. Yeah, that with also worldwide flood. These atheists like to tell you that these layers we see in the earth reach millions of years old. Yet you can find trees going through 4, 6 plus layers that are fossilized. Fossilized trees going through many layers that are each supposed to be millions of years old. By their explanation, that's impossible. Through a worldwide flood, that makes sense, because the layers are actually from hydraulic sorting, which is something, again, that's scientific that we could see. And then when we look at the animals that are layered up in these layers, And they're not always found in the layers that they're supposed to be found, but they're generally found in these layers because, again, of hydraulic sorting. Of course, you're going to have sea creatures on the bottom because worldwide flood, everything happens, and there's a lot of stuff going on that buries everything in the sea. And of course, you're going to have birds and certain life forms up higher in the layers because they are not only flying, but they're less dense. They have lighter bones and are going to be lighter than other animals. So, of course, they're going to be buried later up. More dense animals and bigger animals you'll find lower and lower down. That's just common sense. It's sorted by density for the most part, because there's sometimes where, because of what's going on, things are hindered from actually being sorted in how they would be sorted if they weren't interfered with. Such as you could push down a bird all the way down to the bottom, right? And that's not sorted by density because you pushed it down, right? You dropped a rock on it, whatever. And at the same time, you could be pulling up a whale or some deep sea creature while everything's getting buried, so it appears at the top. Just an example of how you're interfering with the natural sorting of density. But the majority of it is sorted by density, and that's why you would have things in these orders. And speaking of the flood, that ties again to judgment. We're all going to end up dying, and we're going to spend eternity somewhere, right? Energy can't be created nor destroyed. So what I talk to some people about, especially Christians, to get them to have some kind of urgency to them. Because it's not as if people are just going to, they're going to get a slap on the wrist. Oh, you burn up and no longer exist anymore. Or something along those lines. You're going to die forever. And since atheists might be watching this and you're into science, holograms. Holograms are very interesting because if you had a hologram, we can use this screen right here as an example. This picture here of the statue, if you take this hologram and you cut it in half, both sides would end up showing you everything on that picture, right? It's a little degraded though. Like if I split it in half, so one's on the left, one's on the right, everything you see here will be on the left, everything you see here will be on the right. Kind of like a mirror. If you have one mirror, it shows you you. But if you were to perfectly cut the mirror in half and you bent it, you could see your entire self on the left half and your entire self on the right half. That's how the hologram works. And then you cut it in half again, so you got 4 squares, the same thing happens. It's like cutting the mirror into 4 squares. Now you can see yourself in each one of the 4 squares. It shows you the whole picture, but smaller. But if you were able to put them together, it reflects you in the entire mirror. Kind of interesting how that works, right? And that's how the hologram is. It has all the information in it. Each time you cut it, it still has the information. It's just a little more degraded. But this is a depiction of death, right? Where eventually we get to a certain point where our body starts to kind of fade away. It dies, right? We keep copying all the cells, but they're degenerating. Right? The hologram keeps getting split here. And we actually experience this as our body gets older. It's dying as we live. Well, this is hell. This continues as your soul will continue to die just like that. Where it talks about, you're going to be everlasting destruction into death. It's a constant death. Like you live in the flesh. You just continue it in hell. You continue to die. Because energy can't be created nor destroyed. It just changes. And you're going to continue to decay and to die, to destroy forever. That's what we actually deserve. Maybe we think this is some kind of fear tactic. Morally speaking, we don't deserve anything else. I mean, as an atheist, you think you're animals, right? So you don't really think too much of the things you do, as if it's too much of a big deal unless it goes against society and its laws, right? Your selfishness, your inconsideration, your pride, your arrogance, all the things that you think, saying, and doing have an effect on you and everybody else. All these things have an infinite outcome. If left alone, what you have done and your influence will echo forever, right? That deserves an infinite punishment. That is just, right? Like a murderer deserves death, life for life, right? You see how that fits? It's not something that's unjust. It's just where your life's going. It's kind of like you have a child, a son, a daughter, and they grow up. And you try to teach them the right ways, but they want to go into the party life. And you let them know that they can't do that forever. And the more they do that, the actually faster they're going to age and stuff. And before they know it, life's going to pass them by. They're going to wish that they actually settled down and met a good woman, a good man, and had a family, right? But they choose not to do what you say, right? And they go drink and smoke and do whatever other drug they want to do, go party and staying up all night and doing what they do and being promiscuous and whatnot. And their life fades away, or I don't mean fades away and they die, but, passes them by. Next thing you know, they're 40, 50 years old and they don't have the same enjoyment in doing those things that they used to, but they don't have a family either. So they're just kind of like, whoa, what did I do with my life? Or they might not have that kind of luck. They could actually have gotten some kind of illness or disease through their life. They could have seriously injured somebody else, accidentally killed somebody else, seriously injured themselves where they're crippled physically or mentally. There's all kinds of things that could happen because of your lifestyle. But that's just, I'm using this as an example that God's not sending you to this place and forcing you into this place as a punishment. It's something you're choosing and you're doing to yourself in spite of people telling you not to do it. Basically, God is going, hey, your life is leading to hell. I don't want you to go to hell. I actually love you and care about you, whether you believe me or not. I don't want this for you. I'm not your enemy. I make peace with you here by coming into this world as a man, not me, as Jesus Christ, and actually bear the punishment of your life for you. And if you put your faith in me, I'll take your life. In exchange, I'll give you my life, my perfect, eternal life. We're actually going to have joys that are eternal, not something that fades away like some kind of drug. Because I actually love you and care about you. But you reject that and you choose to do something else. You choose the temporal world and the temporal pleasures of sin. Well, then you reap what you sow. You're choosing it. You're not being sent there or thrown in there. You're running into it. It's all on you. But anyway, let's see what else I had up here. The Word of God and salvation. That's pretty much what I was talking about here. We got the Word of God for you to get into. Again, showing that God is here, God exists, and He cares about us. He gives us His Word, the Bible. And I know, especially if you're an atheist, you're saying this, that, and the other thing right now. But if you take the King James Bible and you actually look for errors, there isn't any. And I know if you got this far, you're probably going to give me one or two you think's an error. I'm ready for it. But anyway, even some of you Christians, you probably try to give me an error too. But I'll correct that. And again, showing God's footprint here, God's fingerprints, so that you can actually trust Him. Our problem is two things. We lack humility, and we don't trust God. Those are our two issues. Our pride makes us think where we don't need God, we can do something else. All this other nonsense. And if we even have some kind of inkling that there's God, like you're kind of agnostic or what have you, or even if you're Christian, you still don't quite believe Him, don't quite trust Him. Kind of have your doubts, and that leads you to the issues you have. But anyway, I'm kind of saying that as a claim, bit of a challenge as well, to see what you got to say so I can prove it to you. But we'll see who makes it this far. As I mentioned already, we have a Savior. God is not against us, He's for us. And I don't know what else to say about that. You may be saying about the flood as an example. He drowned the whole world. Okay, well, I got a couple things to tell you about that one. Spent 120 years telling people it was going to rain and He's going to flood the world and they need to get on the ark. How is it His fault that nobody listened? Huh? He offered them a way out. You didn't have to go through it. Like He's doing to you right now. You don't have to go to hell. I don't want you to go to hell. Get on the boat and you'll be saved. Like, He's not even judging you on your sins. He doesn't care the things you've done. He loves you and He's like, don't worry, we'll worry about that later. Just get on the boat. It's going to flood and everybody who's not on the boat's going to die. Just get on the boat. But you don't want to get on the boat. And then you're going to get mad at God because you didn't get on the boat. That's stupid. You can get mad and shake your fist at God, but in reality, you're the dumbass. That's just how it is. But that is about that. I think I went over all my tabs, went over all my notes. So, yeah, that's that. I'll try doing this more. Put my face up here. Maybe I'll get even less views. Scare some of you off. I don't know. Maybe I can do a double thing here. Same time. Whatever. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care.